Hi, my name is Dr. Michelle Miedenberg, and I'm here. I have the pleasure of being here with Jeff Spees, and he wrote this incredible book called Dying with Ease, a compassionate guide for making wiser end-of-life decisions. And I personally have an interest in palliative care because of my foundation, which is called Through My Eyes, which is THRU and we offer clinically guided videotaping for chronically medically ill individuals who want to leave a video legacy for their children and loved ones. And it's a nonprofit organization. And Jeff, the challenge that I have, in running this nonprofit is that people really have a hard time facing their mortality. And sometimes by the time they're ready to do that, it's too late, to do this video legacy. And I know, just speaking to friends and family members, that there's so much regret that they have that they don't have this legacy left for them. So I'm really curious to hear about what led you, to this field of practice. Both your personal, obviously, and professional experience, and also what the content of this book is, because it sounds like it could be so useful for so many people.
Yes, thank you. Thanks so much, Michelle, for having me. I started my medical practice in oncology, and this was in the 80s, and in oncology in the 1980s, most people died. And for me, caring for the patient, working with the patient and family through the end of their life was just part of the deal. I know a lot of oncologists don't do that, but for me, that was just part of the deal. And that's when I learned more about caring for people at the end of their lives, about hospice care, and gradually transitioned my career through several steps, such that the last 10 years of my career was totally as a hospice physician. Everything I've learned about death and dying, I've learned from patients, from people who are going through the experience. People going through the experience have nothing to lose, and they can be honest and open. Not everybody, but are able to teach so much about dying. And one of the huge lessons they taught me is that learning how to die taught them how to live. And they over and over and over.
Could you explain what you mean by that?
So it's the prioritization. It's the, why did I waste all my time trying to get that promotion rather than spending time with my grandchildren? What was that big fight that I had with my son 20 years ago all about, that we wasted so much energy on? And really discovering, when you're at the nearing the end of your life, what is most important to you. And usually those are relationships, and those are people. The issue of encountering one's own mortality, I get asked often, why don't we, why, especially as Americans, why do we seem to be afraid of dying? Well, I think fear of death is just part of the human experience. I mean, we're wired that way. I think Americans are worse because that's our pioneer spirit, our can-do attitude. We can do anything, and we can beat anything. And I don't think about dying, because I can't control that, and that's frightening for me. One of the things that I realized, and that really led me to write this book, was the number of times I was sitting either as an observer more in conversations that were happening. Say just for the simple conversation, the doctor, patient, and family member sitting down to discuss some bad thing. And so many of those discussions happen tangentially. We talk around issues because we're afraid to say the words. And I think one of the reasons that we are afraid to say the words, and the docs are as bad as this as anybody else, is that we haven't faced our own mortality. And when we talk about dying, it's frightening to us. And so that I encourage people to think about dying. It may seem scary, but it's not dangerous. You can talk about dying and you don't die. I mean, 5-year-olds, that's 5-year-old thinking. If a 5-year-old says, I can't think about that, or I can't talk about that because that might make it happen, that's a bad thing.
Yeah, and you know, what's so interesting about that is people always ask me, they said, how do you do, because I do a lot of the interviewing.
Yes.
And they say to me, how do you do what you do? It seems so morbid, you know, and they'll use that word, or they'll say to me, even the person who I'm sitting with actually, you know, and obviously I'm a human being, so sometimes I'll emote because of something really, you know, moving that the person shared with me. And they'll say to me, how do you do this? How do you sit with people like me, you know, and talk? So yeah, I think it's scary because of the unknown. People don't like the unknown, right?
I think that's exactly right.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I organized my book, that we talk about some of just the nuts and bolts that people don't know. What is it like to die in America? What's it like to die in a hospital? What's it like to die in a nursing home? What is hospice about? How does that happen? And then to also talk about the legal stuff. What about medical aid in dying? What about state to state regulations and advance directives and things like that? So part of this is just nuts and bolts, how it happens and what you can do about that. But part of it also is encountering, I believe, that emotional piece that's probably more frightening than anything to a lot of people. You described the tears rolling down. I know exactly what you're saying, and those were the best conversations. I often felt that when I left the room, if somebody was crying, it was good. If we were all crying, it was great, because that meant it was honest and you encountered something real. And that is a tremendous gift. That is tremendously valuable. It's a tremendous gift. Now I realize that saying that may scare some people off. You don't all have to cry, and it doesn't have to be frightening.
Yes.
But it's okay. And it's not, it doesn't have to be frightening.
It's also connecting.
It is connecting.
Yeah.
It is connecting, and that piece is also healing for and that's one of those paradoxes, that as someone is dying from a disease that is racking their body, they are becoming healed as they encounter who they are, as they encounter the people that they love, as they encounter their relationship with the transcendent. That can be so special, but it's hard to do in 2 days. It's hard to do in 2 days.
Yeah.
I've often asked people to think about one thing, and this may sound a little bizarre, but I suggest that people think about their belly button, because your belly button, when for some people it's cute and pierced, and for some people it hasn't been seen in a long time, but that's okay. So as you're getting out of the shower and you see your belly button in the mirror, to think about, what's that about? Why is that there?
Yes.
Well, that belly button is there to remind you that you joined with every other human being, with every other mammal in being born, and just like every other mammal, you will die. And there's just no other way out of it. And then as you think about that, to notice how that feels, and maybe let that feeling inform where you want to go with thinking about your own mortality.
Yeah, and that's an interesting way of thinking about it. I think also, I know sometimes I just personally sit and think what would happen, if I were dying, and how would I want to be? And I think about wanting to say goodbye to everybody and have all these, ideas of how I would want it to be. And it's so interesting.
Sure.
I'll never forget, I had the supervisor who was a very, very, very like world-renowned author. And, you know, and he was also a very, you know, coveted therapist. And he unfortunately had prostate cancer for about 10 years. And I was in a group with him before he died, and he could not face his mortality.
Yeah.
And we went to his house, we ended up visiting him, and we confronted him. We said, you know, you actually ended the group in somewhat of an unprofessional way. And then he said to us, he said, I just can't face this is happening to me. And then when he eventually died, you know, we shared the story with his wife, and his wife, it was so fascinating. His wife said to us, I just want you to know that like you all implored him to go to therapy to work on this, you know, while he was going through the process of dying. She said, I went with him to one session. I sat there with him. He did not say a word the entire time, and he refused to go back. And she said he loved life so much, and he loved us and his family. He just couldn't face his death.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and it taught me a lot, because it would like, he would be the one that I would think would face it, right? Because of who he was as a person.
Right.
And it has nothing to do with that. It has to do, right? Because everybody's a person. That's exactly it. They have their own experiences and thoughts and feelings. And so it was just it was so interesting. And this other thing that sticks in my mind, I think it was 2 weeks ago, I did a videotape with really sad. It was a 35-year-old male, and he was diagnosed with cancer basically around the day that his daughter was born.
Oh.
And his daughter is 2 years old right now. And I just did his videotape, and I asked very direct questions. I asked, like, you know, what would you want to say to your daughter, like, when she graduates? What would you want to say to her when she has her first, you know, partner? What would you want to say if she ended up getting married or whatever? Like, I'll ask, like, milestones. And he looked at me, and like a deer, you know, out of headlights. And he said to me, I can't answer you. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, she's 2. I don't know what her personality is.
Right.
I can't even answer that, because I wouldn't even know who she is and how to talk to her. That got to me. That I was really moved by when he said that. So you hear all of these snippets, you know, of how people are experiencing, you know, their emotions that are just so intense. But I you know, one thing I've read a lot on death and dying, and there's so many regrets, and I agree with what you said. You know, and that's why, you know, you hear like, live in the moment, live every day as if it's your last day, right?
Right.
So who is this book specifically written for?
Right. It's written for anybody, but it's written for somebody who wants to be honest about it. I don't expect that your your supervisor would want to read this book. I don't think he would. And I love that story. Because it reminds me that there's no right way to do this. It's okay to do it as you are. I think that's a tremendous story, because I think dying with integrity, dying being the person you are, is healing and is wholeness. I think that's just fine, as long as that was true.
That was true for him. He didn't want to.
That's good.
He didn't want to go there.
That's right. That's right. And it's probably not for the 35-year-old. Well, it might be with a 2-year-old daughter. It may be just too much right at that time. Although his 2-year-old daughter the 16-year, when she turns 16, she wants to know who he is. She doesn't need to know what he thinks he wants to tell her. But you know that, and that's what you told him, and that's okay. So my book is for anybody who wants to know a little bit more, and I think maybe more useful for somebody who has a diagnosis of a cancer or a dementia or a heart disease, or is caring for someone. Because I do believe that caregivers do a much better job if they're also comfortable in their own skin
Yeah.
with their own mortality. If taking care of mom who is dying, if that scares me because, you know, I'm so like my mother, then that's maybe not the best situation. So I think anybody, I mean, I hope the whole world
Yes,
love,
absolutely.
you know, loves it, but it's for people who want to think about their
Yeah.
life.
And
Maybe not even their death, but their life. Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
thinking this could also be a wonderful book for practitioners too.
I'm hoping so.
Yeah.
I didn't
Yeah.
I didn't intend that as the audience, but I think
Yeah.
I think so. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to endorse it also for practitioners because I think anybody who's working in the field, you know, of death and dying, you know, and in palliative care, I think they would get such value out of reading this. It sounds
Right.
like it's a
Right.
chock full of resources and also just very, very insightful, just in terms of
I hope so.
emotionally. Yeah, yeah. So thank you. Anything else additionally that you wanted to share before we sign off? Any
I
last?
don't think so.
No?
I
Okay.
appreciate what you're doing.
Yeah.
I think the legacy piece that you're doing is tremendous.
Thank you.
If I would, I think I would add one point, if it's okay. And this has been said over and over and over again because
Sure.
it's 30 years old now. And this comes from really maybe one of the first American death and dying books by the hospice professionals. Was Ira Byock, who's was at the time was in Missoula, Montana, and is now one of the grand old men of although he's not that old, of hospice and palliative care, who in his book in the late 90s, Dying Well, described the end of life work that needs to be done in 5 statements. And these were statements that needed to be said by the dying person. And they were, I love you, I forgive you, forgive me, thank you, and goodbye. And as you think about who you would want to say those things to, that informs the way to think about your dying, but also to think about, why wait till I'm dying to say those things? And then I can get on and live more joyously.
I love that. I absolutely love that. And I have to say, just because of the sign of the times and where we're at with COVID and everything,
It's a thing.
gosh, yeah. I mean, it's just people are grieving all over the
All
place.
over.
And I personally am working with several patients
I'm
who have,
sure.
yeah, who have family members who died of COVID. It's just awful. Yeah. So, you know, what an appropriate time for this to come out to really help those who are suffering. So thank you so much. Really
Thank you,
appreciate
Michelle.
that. Okay.